The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Augur Associates, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. Just a quick message from me. I hope you're all dealing with lockdown and you're all in good spirits and health. Obviously quite a difficult time for everyone. Got a great show coming up about France now, but I just wanted to ask if any of you are young content writers, maybe students or recent graduates that are interested in the space. I'm looking for some help with some more content, so I'd love to speak to you. So if you yourself are interested or you know someone else, please do get in touch via LinkedIn or the website, and I hope to speak to you soon. Anyway, now on with the show. Cheers. On today's show, I have Benjamin-Alexandre Jeanroy and Aurélien Bernard. I hope I pronounced them well. They are co-founders of Augur Associates, which is a French cannabis consultancy. And fittingly, they're here to talk about cannabis in France. Welcome, guys.
Hi, Anuj.
Hey, Anuj.
How you doing?
I'm pretty good, thank you.
So, it'd be crazy to not talk about the other C word, COVID. How are you guys getting on during the lockdown?
I'm getting well, staying at home and just respecting the barriers that we put up to shut off this thing.
Sure.
Yeah, same here. I'm pretty worried about what's going on outside and what's going to happen afterwards. But aside from that, I think we're quite lucky and we're okay.
Good that you're safe and sound and you have internet, which is good. So look, we'll talk about cannabis in France and we'll give the audience a high level of what the situation is in the various sort of subsectors within cannabis. But maybe we just start to begin with a bit about you individually and how you came together to create Augur and, what were your motivations for getting into this industry?
So I've started working on drug policy about 8 years ago. I worked for some time at UNODC in Laos and Panama, and I was very interested in the international relation aspect of the issue and realized quite bluntly that change was difficult to come from that dimension and from that level. And so I decided that my work would be more useful at the national level, which remains today where real power lies, and with the idea that if we make sensible changes in France, it will help change within the EU, which therefore will help at the global level. We're not there yet, but I think we've achieved some good things, and we're moving forward since the past 4 or 5 years that I've been in the field in France. Come from mostly civil society at first. Developed several initiatives working on drug policy reform and obviously on cannabis. And that's how I met Aurélien about 4.5 years ago. And about a year and a half, we started Augur Associates with the idea to make it the first consultancy in France dedicated to sustainable cannabis and hemp industry. And that's been our focus since about a year and a half.
As for me, I was, before working in cannabis, I was web project manager in one of the biggest media companies in France. And I created Newsweed, which is a leading cannabis media in France and in French. 5 years ago, making the observation that we didn't have any reliable source of information about cannabis in France. There was a lot of American media, for example, but we didn't have anything here. So I began to write on cannabis, overstating that I was aware of everything due to my consumer past, but quickly realized that I knew nothing about cannabis and that all the information that we have in France were falsified or wrong. So I read a lot of Californian literature on medical cannabis, on medicinal cannabis too, how cannabis acts with the body, and just learned a lot of things and just did Newsweed to answer to my own question at first, and then develop real media with a complete editorial line. And that's how I met Benjamin, because Newsweed is not pro-legalization or pro-cannabis, it's just an objective publication. But as for myself, at a personal level, I began to realize that things were not moving in France. And I just tried to do things like Benjamin, who was creating a citizen lobby. And we began to work at this level. And as he said before, realized a year and a half ago that we were ready to just help companies to enter the French market as far as developed. And we are working on that.
Great. I love that about Newsweed. That's how I kind of approach the podcast, really. The things that I'm interested in learning about, I hope that other people are as well. And when you mentioned that you said in France, a lot of the stuff that you thought you knew about cannabis was lies. Can you give a few examples?
Yeah, totally. All the education we have on cannabis is given at school by policemen. And we just have 2 hours saying that cannabis is bad and that if you take cannabis, you will be mad during 2 days and just getting bad and bad and bad. And when you are 14 years old, it just gives you the envy to test to see if it's true. And when you test it, you realize that it's complete shit and that you like it. So it just treated like a bad drug, but your own experience makes you realize that it is not true. Cannabis has bad sides, obviously, but we are not told the real bad sides that it can have, and even less the good sides that it can be. So the French law still says that if you present cannabis in a favorable way, you can be accused of incitation to drug consumption, and you are passible of many years of prison and a big fine. And that was one of my constatations when I created Newsweed, that the only way to present cannabis in a truthful way was to just say in what was happening elsewhere.
It's sad that that's the law, but good that you didn't pay attention to that and put out Newsweed in the best way, in the objective way that you could. Cool. Well, thank you for that rundown on your backgrounds. I guess now we, talk about France. So in some ways, France is probably, for such a big country, one of the sort of slowest countries to adopt progressive policies in this area. But equally, France is the biggest hemp producer in Europe, I think. Is that right?
Yes, it's totally right. In the same time, we have a great history of cannabis consumption and hemp cultivation. And it's always strange to be so reluctant to make law evolve on cannabis.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe we take the various subsectors individually, and maybe we start with medical cannabis. What's the status of medical cannabis in France?
So what we need to know is that cannabis, all users, is regulated in France by a law that dates back to 1971. Since then, we haven't made really any kind of progress in any of the uses that we can think about until 2018. And 2018, so the beginning on the institutional side at the government level, an influx on the position that was the same for more than 40 years. And so that in itself, that was quite a change where we had for the first time an official saying that we should explore that direction and see if it will work for France. And therefore that's what happened. The health ministry set up a special temporary scientific committee that was tasked for the first 6 months to decide if medical cannabis was pertinent for France. Shocking, their answer was yes. And that engaged another 6 months of work from that committee to try to kind of draw the lines of what could be an experimentation for France in that aspect, to see at a small level if it was feasible. And so after the 6 months, they've decided that medical cannabis will be experimented by about 3,000 to 4,000 patients on 5 different conditions. So you've got MS, some sort of epilepsy and infantile epilepsy, neuropathic pains, palliative care, and oncology care. And so that's quite wide in a sense. And it's actually very interesting to see that they've chosen those conditions, that some are very specific and other are broader. And it's interesting because the experimentation is made not to assess the validity and the success of such treatments. They've decided that there is enough clinical data that we know it's sure and it can be really helpful. And so the experimentation, and that's often an outsider mistake to think of what's going on in France as a big clinical trial. It is not. It's first and foremost to assess the feasibility of the process in terms of distribution, in terms of prescription, in terms of safety for the different actors. So that's what would be assessed at the end of 18 to 24 months period. So that's the other component that they've added. Products are not limited. We're still waiting on what kind of products exactly that they'd like for the experimentation, but all products should be available, including flowers. So obviously there is a lot of questions that rise from there, but we'll get into the details later on. I think it's just today we are obviously in the midst of a lot of different health and social issues that take precedence. It's good this way, but I feel for all the patients today that could use that already use it. We know the problematic with in terms of getting your medicine. I think it's a problem that happens in all countries. But officially, the experimentation was supposed to start in September. In a sense, the first prescription were supposed to happen in September. They are actually right now integrating the 3 to 4K patients into the process. But obviously, everything is lagging behind. And so we don't really know when it's going to start, which is in itself a very, very problematic and calls for the attention to, every actor concerned by this question, and not to untight the pressure, but made in a intelligent and smart way on our elected officials and on the medias. This is not a done deal. This has never been a promise by Macron's party during the elections, and this is something that we need to write carefully, I think.
Yeah. So are you effectively at the moment, no one can be prescribed medical cannabis until the end of this sort of trial?
So it's not exactly true, but yeah.
In fact, in France, a French doctor can prescribe medical cannabis, but a French patient can't get it in France. He has to go in Germany or in Netherlands. And when he comes back to France, he is illegal because he has cannabis on him. So technically, you can prescribe it and be like every recreative user. When you have your treatment, you are facing jail and fine.
Right.
But as for the experimentation, they can't give an experimentation prescription before September 21 now. And once again, the patients are facing the harshness of not having any medical cannabis available. Decriminalization would be a solution for them, but our French politicians don't get this argument.
Yeah.
And they just want a final regulation, even if other solution could be good for patients in the meantime.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a familiar story, really, isn't it? In lots of countries, I think. But I guess one of the good things is that they're accepting, if I understood correctly, they're accepting data from other countries, other research, basically. But it's mainly that, is it kind of assessing the logistics of setting up, making this available?
So yeah, there is several dimensions officially, and that goes along with what Aurélien mentioned about doctors being able to prescribe medical cannabis to patients today in France. Medical cannabis as markets authorization drugs are legal in France since 2013. So there is a special access to get Marinol and Drobaninol, and also Epidiolex and Sativex have been in discussion for some time now to get their access. They should have access. There is issues about the price in between the health agency and the lab, but this is something that is theoretically possible. In fact, obviously it's not accessible to patients, but in the legal aspect of it, it is, which allows for another thing which hasn't happened yet, but it's the feasibility to do research in France with cannabis. It hasn't happened yet because you needed a political, I think, push to really declare this as feasible and doable by the administration. But the other thing is that it's obviously quite complex process to do with the administration. And the fact that we're launching the experimentation will help. And that's why one of the things that we've been working on with Augur is trying to push forward studies here in France to answer a simple question. And, an argument that rises a lot is that we don't have enough data. We don't know if it's going to work. Well, we agree. Let's do more. And that's some of the things that we intend to do.
Yeah, always we need more data. But good that things are starting in France. Okay, that's a good overview of medical. How about CBD? So, I mean, in the UK, it's a very big and growing industry. What's the story in France?
As for CBD in France, it's still a gray area. In fact, we are the first producer of hemp in Europe, but the use of flower is forbidden in France. In fact, the law does not forbid it, but just states that salts and seeds could be processed. And by not mentioning flowers, the French authorities consider that flowers are a legal battle on towards a sentence of the law. But it doesn't restrict entrepreneurs to sell CBD and CBD flowers. So we have at least 200 shops in France selling CBD flowers, and online we have a lot of shop opening every week. I see it day after day. I think we have more websites selling CBD flowers than physical shops today. It is really strange. And if the shops are bothered by law enforcement, it happens from time to time. Last summer, we have a lot of raids. The website doesn't have any trouble making business, and some of the websites are making million euro. So it begins to be a really big business. And the shops are selling CBD product and CBD flowers too. And we don't, as CBD is not strictly regulated in France, we really see some crappy product without any regulation, without any testing, without any analysis. And we don't really know if there is CBD inside. A French politician started to want to regulate it before the coronavirus break, and now it will be delayed and not before the end of the year. But they are aware of this gray area on hemp and hemp flowers, and we are aware of all the business opportunities that are related to flower. So things will be moving pretty soon, but we have to wait for them just to be clear, and so that entrepreneurs doesn't face any drug penalties and jail time as it has happened.
Sure. So, I mean, to recap then, so if you're selling CBD, you're operating in a bit of a grey area. It's not clear whether you're allowed to or not, but is the case that they're just not enforcing it, or sometimes they are, sometimes they're not?
Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. It depends where you're located, how you do it. For example, the first shop that had trouble last year was calling himself coffee shop, even if he was selling CBD sheets. And coffee shop is relating to drug, and cannabis is illegal in France. So if you want to sell CBD, the worst thing to do is to present it as cannabis, and he did that, and he has trouble. And then it depends on where you're located. Some prosecutors go after the CBD shop, and some other don't. In Paris, it depends on really county by county, neighborhood by neighborhood. We saw some shops that are open since 3 years now and didn't have any trouble. And some other, after 2 days of openings, they had law enforcement police inside and were shut down.
So it's very inconsistent.
Just to complete on the legal and political, I think since summer 2018, when the first shops opened and we had a kind of a wave of prohibition reaction with the close of several of these shops, we've came a long way since that moment. A lot of them have reopened. Others have opened, and it seems that the judgments during cases turn more and more in favor of CBD and using and selling CBD in France. At the political side, as Aurélien said, there is, I think, us and several other actors, including the Professional Hemp Union, which we advise, have helped really educate and push forward the need to reform, to change this kind of, Kafkain situation where our farmers need to, destroy their heads and their flowers and the fruits of the hemp because they can't use that part of the plants according to a certain interpretation of the law by the current authorities, which I think are being challenged at many different levels, including at the European Court of Justice, but at many different levels of justice in France, and at the National Assembly with that mission of information that was launched in January and gonna kind of overview all the different uses of cannabis and hemp. And obviously CBD is a big part of it. And we do hope that when the conclusion of that report will come out, and as Aurélien said, we probably envision that by the end of the year, we'll have a clearer and a much needed change to reassure actors who wish to enter or already entered in that field, which is burgeoning, but really only waiting to be able to develop itself in a sustainable manner.
Yeah, it sounds quite similar to the UK, actually, in many respects. The key one being that hemp farmers, they can't use the buds and the flower. They have to destroy it, which is, the analogy is it's like growing an apple tree just for the wood and throwing the apples away. In the UK, we have very recently, or the regulator in the UK has very recently said that it is going to look to enforce the European Food Standards Agency novel food regulations. Have you had a similar thing in France as well in relation to CBD?
So not exactly. And I would say the difference in between the UK and France right now is that we have a political process that is going hopefully to change that situation. Not sure it's the same for you in the UK, but aside from that, you're right. We can't use the flower, therefore we can't extract any cannabinoids from it. And what's a bit outrageous is, as you say, it's missing the whole point of some of the things that we don't use in the plant. And to answer your question on the novel food, right now it seems like it's not being enforced in France. The government hasn't taken an official position on that, but we don't see a wave of inspections and so on, except in the case of denunciation or related activities. But it's not something that is being enforced, and we recommend to the administration to weigh on the judgment of the European Court of Justice as well of the mission of information to see if we should enforce that part, of if we should maybe keep it the way it was before, in a sense that CBD in natural level of the plant should be authorized within products with a full spectrum under a regulated threshold of THC. So that's where we are right now in France. There is a lot of different food and food supplements that are being sold in France, and it's definitely a growing trend.
Right, there's a lot there, isn't there? A lot, and we're all waiting on lots of new statements from the regulators, like we are in the UK as well. And moving on to hemp, industrial hemp. So, as we mentioned, France is the biggest hemp producer in Europe. What's the status of industrial hemp?
Industrial hemp in France. So we are the first producer in Europe. We are more than 17,000 hectares of hemp cultivation. And we have 6 or 7 big hemp cooperatives in France that are using hemp for the fibers, the stalk, and the seeds. We are really using hemp in our automobile industry, for example. Some Bugatti parts are made of hemp instead of glass fiber, for example, because it is more solid and lighter. So we are really in the front of the European hemp uses, and they only allow some varieties, not all the varieties, and all the development of the French strain have been around the 0% THC in the plants. So when we will be able to use the flowers for the CBD, it will be a problem in France because we don't have a lot of strains that have a lot of CBD inside. So from one part, it will be a great field for research and breeding and strain hunting, for example. But from another part, a lot of strange strengths are against CBD for now, against CBD strains. So maybe it will be difficult to be better than that we have now.
I think we're not here to tell what all the amazing things that we can do with hemp, but in France, there is already a large production that is bound to develop even more, as it is very much in line with our current government and where they want to go in terms of industrial productions and sustainable eco-agricultural processes and so on. So it's just a matter, I think, of regulating the other parts of the plant and their uses. I think industrial only need smart entrepreneurs that want to get into plastic or graphene replacement and so forth. And we're already seeing a rise of young entrepreneurs who are willing to get into that, and it's quite exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, the economic argument is big, isn't it? Because if you can utilize the buds and the flower and generate revenue from that, then it just adds as an incentive to grow hemp in general, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't think recreational is on the cards for any of the major European countries, at least in the near term. But what is the general attitude in France? What's the general scene?
So France is the first consumer of cannabis in Europe. In the same time, we have a special field of operation for cannabis distribution. As we see it in this time of staying at home, a lot of users does not rely on themselves and on self-cultivation. Compare, for example, with California, where everybody was growing at the time of medical cannabis or even before. French really rely on dealers. That said, legalization of cannabis in France is like for every election, the stem comes back and doesn't move forward after. For example, Emmanuel Macron, our current president, was pretty willing or pretty open to legalization. In the book he wrote before he was willing to be president. Then he went back to decriminalization. And then, in fact, he recriminalized cannabis by adding another fine in addition of the current fines that was already existing in France for simple use. So we really went back in all time. And just getting back and not force. But a lot of politicians now are aware of what is happening elsewhere. And since California at first and then Canada legalized really the mainstream media in opposition of specialized media like Newsweed, but mainstream media are talking about cannabis every week now. And when I began Newsweed 5 years ago, I was the only one to speak about cannabis, and all my friends just pretended that I was a crazy guy to talk about cannabis in France. And now they are sending me all the mainstream media links that talk about it. So the conversation really opened the last year.
Also, France can look on many aspects as very conservative. I think, given the current global trend, the question is not necessarily if it's going to happen, but when, and obviously how. And I say this with the understanding that with the current mission of information unfolding at the Parliament, they will tackle the question of social attitudes. So this is something that is, as Aurélien said, not a taboo anymore, and it's really getting something that is being taken seriously, and that's something that we intended to change 4 or 5 years ago when we started working on drug policy reform, because that was something that when mentioned on the TV, people would be laughing. And we do know that it's not a laughing matter at all. And I would just And I think the question of how it's regulated will be incredibly important in France. And we need to focus on what works and the context. So where we're implementing this, I'm going to give two examples. The first one is rebouncing on what Aurélien said about homegrown cultivation. In France, we seem to be the biggest home growers in all Europe. That's where you have the biggest sales in seeds and material to grow. And I hadn't thought about this, but I think it's brilliant, because I think Aurélien is right to say that after the virus and the crisis is gone, we're going to see a surge, and many people realizing that they may need their own production at home. So if this is not taken into account for future legalization or regulation, this will be problematic. And the second thing, I think it's the most important question that in France, but probably a lot of other places too, we need to answer, that what do we do today with the spaces and the people directly and indirectly that sustain themselves on cannabis traffic. And I'm not talking with, the 1% on the top of the pyramid, but mostly of the 80% of the workforce that is really a lumpen proletariat, who's barely making the minimal legal without having any, social advantages and so forth. And it's not about, saying, all those good people, but it's just a matter of looking at reality. We're gonna have a lot of problems if we don't integrate this question, in terms of social justice, obviously, because those people have been answering a need that all classes in France need, especially the ones that can afford it. And this is something that we need to answer for. But in terms of just simple reasoning, a lot of those people are incredible entrepreneurs, and I think we'll have a lot of interesting exchange of flows that need to happen in between the country and the knowledge of the plant, and how to evolve into a ultra competitive market. It's definitely something that Aurélien has been working on with Newsweed in trying to show how it was being done outside of France. But I do think that if we want to make a difference and set kind of a model for regulation, is by inspiring and getting the different stuff that works from abroad, and also be creative and innovative in answering questions that haven't been positively answered so far in terms of this very topic of social justice.
Yeah, really interesting. I don't think we've talked about it a huge amount on the podcast, but
I'm not surprised though.
Yeah.
not for you, but the business community is, for its large part, not coming, I think it's about 60-40, and 60% of people working actually in the industry don't necessarily come from that space originally. And still we always need to know more and to learn more, and to realize that if we're able to work in that space, it's also because we have some privilege, some others more than others. And I think knowing this is important for the industry in an ethical way, but also in a business way. The people working in drug policy reform and trying to open the market, in making them more inclusive, are actually making the industry more market shares in terms of very basic business sense. And although it's not my primary input when I think about it, I think it makes sort of sense for the industry to support those people working at the international level, at the CND in Vienna, who report on this super important stuff that most of us don't understand and really need to get a grasp on it, as much as very much on the field, helping out people who have addictions or different issues like this, including obviously the need that we need to support patients in turn for medical cannabis. I'm not afraid to say that I think the industry could do much more.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And probably one of the biggest mistakes that they made in Canada was by not getting cannabis cultivators to help farm cannabis on that scale. I think they used tomato growers to begin with, and there was a lot of wasted crops. So exactly, if you look at it from an economic point of view, then there's a good reason to get people involved. But on the social justice side, there's an even bigger reason. Well, thank you. That's been a really good rundown on like the main areas and how it's working in France. Do you think, I mean, because you guys talk to a lot of people all around Europe and you go to conferences and stuff, do you see things evolving in France differently to the rest of Europe?
Tough question. Yeah, a good question, a tough question. Because as we said, we are a very conservative country despite the appearances. In particular with cannabis, it's like very complicated to make things move forward. We saw the same thing with marriage for all, and we had demonstration in the streets and really politicians who were against. And it made really a big fuss in France. And I think they don't want to have this kind of thing for cannabis. So they have a very protective approach. And just the goal of the information mission that happens now in National Assembly is to have a quiet debate with objective facts and data, and not just cannabis is good or cannabis is bad, because just giving your opinion on cannabis is not a fact and does not make things move forward. So I think the southern countries of Europe have opportunities to go much quicker than France, for example, because they are much in bigger need of money. Simply that, for example, Greece or Spain, Portugal, Italy, they won't have any difficulties to make citizens understand that it is a business opportunity to grow cannabis and export it, because it won't be only for national use consumption. They also want to be part of the global medical cannabis business and have EU GMP cultivation sites and just be able to export to Australia, for example, or to Canada even. So I think they can be quicker than France. And little country like Macedonia, for example, or Albania could have a huge argument to restrict and try to stop the black market by creating a real business around it. And for medical cannabis, it will take time, but I think it will be the first domain to be open, obviously.
Also, I think what differentiates France, it's not necessarily how it's gonna change itself. It's structural. You know, we have an enormous market on all the different uses that we've just mentioned. There is a cultural, very deeply entrenched use of cannabis, of hemp, and that's something that's been continuous. And we have another thing, you know, that few nations, few countries have, is that the brand France in itself, you know, has marketing value that makes people think about high-end, very curated products. And I think that's where France will differentiate itself. We really have the possibility because of, you know, when it's made in France, it equals quality, it equals a certain state of mind and perspective. And that's something that I think France will use. And obviously, not only France, but also other companies who want to create things in France, even coming from abroad, because it will have value in itself. So obviously, it will take time on the recreational aspect, but right now it's possible to do so on CBD, on wellness hemp, and obviously in medical also, which because of our tradition and strong industry in the pharmaceutical space, I think we're in capacity to bring great things to the game.
Yeah, well, I look forward to the champagne of weed in the next few years.
It exists. We have champagne with terpenes already.
Yes, in fact, I tasted some. Well, look, I mean, that's great. And yeah, I definitely think, I think each different country has a unique opportunity to have its own version or own approach to it. So
for sure,
I've no doubt the French will be a high quality version as well. Right. Getting on to my last question, my traditional last question is, what did your parents say when you told them that you were starting a cannabis consultancy?
As for me, they were pretty comprehensive, but in fact, I didn't tell them that I was working in cannabis at first, before 1 or 2 years because I didn't know how to introduce it to them. And wasn't pretty sure of their reaction. And I just needed to feel ready to have this conversation and just to present it based on fact and on what I did, and just showing that it was working and that it's just a business like another. But luckily, the news helped me with California legalizing. And when California legalize something, it's a good sign. So for the consultancy that arrived after, they have no problem with that now.
Great. And Ben?
On my side, I think my parents never smoked. I actually smoked the first joint of my dad's life with him, 10 years ago, something like this. But I come from the drug policy reform, the institutional kind of research, and even civil society, which is not, the greatest space to feel comfortable financially and sustainable. So actually, when I started to get into the more business side of it, I think my dad was relieved.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
A purely commercial approach to it. That's great. Cool.
And one funny thing on my side is that my dad can't stop me when I was a teenager to stop spending time in front of my computer and stop smoking cannabis. And now that's what I do every day. So maybe sometimes you don't have to listen completely to your father.
Great. Good way to end it. Cool. Well, thank you guys for taking the time to record this. And I hope everything's going well during these sort of strange times. But it'd be great to have you guys back on as things progress in France, and hopefully we'll have a bigger update next time we speak.
Yeah, with pleasure. Thank you so much for having us, Anuj, and do take care of yourself. Everyone listening to us, I hope you're going good and not getting crazy over that situation. Stay home, take care of your loved ones, and thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Anuj.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for joining me for that. That was a really interesting show. France, obviously a massive country, so great to hear that things are progressing there, and we hope that the pace of change picks up a bit. Just another reminder that I am looking for content writers, so if you know anyone or you yourself are interested, please do drop me a line. Until next week, cheers.